two Muslim academics discussed how to counter extremism within Islam and how to encourage moderate and reformist movements. The discussion at the Washington Institute for Near East Studies ran about an hour and a half.
Sadly, we all know what extremism looks like. We've all had enough visuals over the last year. 2015 began with Paris and Charlie Hebdo. It ends with, hopefully it ends with only Paris and San Bernardino and the other atrocities that we have seen. We all know what extremism looks like. What does moderation look like? Is moderation merely the absence of beheading, the absence of shooting innocents? Or is moderation something else? Is moderation not just the absence of terrible acts, but actually something more substantive, more positive, more forward-looking? Today we're going to take a deep dive in what could be a very sensitive topic, and a topic that I think resonates well beyond this room, well beyond the policymaking environment here in Washington, into our own great national debate about the role of religion in society, the tolerance and expectations and welcome and participation of Muslim Americans in our society, and what we mean by moderation and reform in the context of what we're talking about today, Islam and religion more generally. I could not be more pleased than to have the pairing that we have today on this podium to discuss this very sensitive, but I think extraordinarily important issue. Is there a moderate Islam? What does moderation mean in Islam? What does it mean in practice? What does it mean in theory? How does one achieve it? We're fortunate to have two people who exemplify what one of our speakers is professionally so associated with, which is the concept of moral courage. The concept that that courage is not just on the battlefield, but courage is what people can display in society and culture, and it is about ideas and beliefs, standing for them, bringing about change, even if there is a great personal cost. And both of our speakers today have exemplified that idea, that ideal of moral courage within the context of Islam in our society. So first, I'm very proud to turn to Irshad Manji. This is not Irshad's first time speaking at the Washington Institute, but it has been some years since she has been with us. I'm very delighted that she is back. Irshad is the founder and the director of the Moral Courage Project at New York University. She is a prominent speaker and lecturer, public figure, public intellectual, author of books such as Allah, Liberty, and Love, The Trouble with Islam Today, A Muslim's Call for Reform in Her Faith. She's also taken this message to the screen with a very successful Emmy-nominated PBS documentary, Faith Without Fear. I'm very delighted that you could find time in your schedule to join us for today's discussion. I don't call today a debate. I call today a discussion and an exchange of views, and I think that's the spirit in which we're going to proceed. After Irshad speaks, I'm delighted to introduce my colleague here at the Institute, Mohammed Dajani. Mohammed is the Weston Fellow at the Washington Institute. He is the founder of a movement of moderate Islam called Wasatiyah, which is, of course, Arabic for moderation, a term that is found in the Quran itself. He's a political scientist with degrees from two American universities, South Carolina and Texas. He established the American Studies program at Al-Quds University in Jerusalem. Mohammed, as this audience knows, had his own brush with moral courage not too long ago when he took a delegation of Palestinian students to Auschwitz, and has suffered for that in his own work, life, environment back in Jerusalem, back at El-Quds, the object of death threats and car bombings, car burnings. I'm very pleased, though, that he is at home here in Washington so he can spread his message about wasatiyya, about moderation in Islam. I'm intrigued as a student of Islamic politics. I'm intrigued to have two people who bring so much intellectual heft, but also personal experience to the themes that we're talking about today, themes of moderation, reform in Islam, how these words differ in meaning, how these words can be applied in practice, and I am eagerly looking forward to their exchange. So first I'll turn to Irshad, and then after that to Mohammed, and then we'll have time for lots of discussion. Irshad.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Pleased to be here, and I'd like to begin on a rather provocative note by suggesting to my good friend and sometime hero, Professor Mohammed Dajani, that in fact he's not a moderate, that he's a reformer. Now, that may or may not mean that you'll have to change the name of your movement, sir. But I want to explain what I mean by the difference between these two ideas, moderate and reformist. And to do that, I'll start with a very brief video. And it's a video that I did in London, England, for the Guardian newspaper. It's only about a minute long, but it'll give you a good foundation for what I'm about to say over the next few minutes. Let's roll. Moderate Muslims are not very moderate today. They exhibit all of the traits of orthodoxy, including dogma and fear. And what they're most afraid of is the fear of busting out of group identity. And why do moderate Muslims deny this central fact? Because they are steeped in group identity, so that speaking out is selling out. I am not a moderate Muslim. I am a reformist. And that means somebody who recognizes that the Quran contains 3 times as many verses calling on Muslims to engage in critical thinking rather than blind submission. And in that sense, reformist Muslims are at least as authentic as the so-called moderates. Okay, so things are changing. And I will explain what I mean by that in just a moment. But let me start with the concept of the moderate Muslim. I mentioned in my video for The Guardian that very often moderates are marked by defensiveness. Defensiveness, first and foremost, about Western imperialism. So much so that they're distracted from dealing with the imperialists within Islam itself, the extremists, who study after study shows target and kill Muslims on far greater numbers than do foreign imperial powers. So defensiveness is one hallmark of the moderate Muslim. Another hallmark, though, is fear. And fear of what? Well, as I also explained, fear of busting out of group identity. And what I mean by that is many moderate Muslims are prone to calling people like me and people like Professor Dajani sellouts, traitors, you've heard it all before, Uncle Toms, native informants, simply for taking the risk of speaking truth to power, of having the moral courage to do the right thing in the face of our own fears of being stigmatized. Where does this fear and this defensiveness come from? I think it's cultural. It's not religious. As a matter of fact, the Quran contains many, many progressive passages about the need to display moral courage. One such passage, for example, says, "Believers, conduct yourselves with justice and bear true witness before God, even if it be against yourselves, your parents, or your family," as in your extended family. So speak truth to your own when there is injustice among your own. That's chapter 4, verse 135. And there's still another beautiful passage, much simpler than this one, that states, God does not change the condition of a people until they change what is inside themselves. That's chapter 13, verse 11. I could go on, but I give you just two examples of where the Quran calls on us to be brave within our own tribe. So the defensiveness and the fear of many moderate Muslims is not, I would argue, religious. It is, I would suggest, cultural. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean that within particularly Arab culture, there is a custom known as honor, and in particular, it refers to group honor. Women primarily are the biggest victims of this, as women are assigned the position of carrying the shame in the family. So that if a woman is accused of transgressing moral boundaries by, for example, being seen with a man whom she is not related to, or perhaps dating, or God forbid, dating somebody outside of the faith, she will be, in many parts of the world, accused of dishonoring the family and will pay a very heavy price for it. But I can assure you that men are also victims of group honor, in that they too are infantilized. They are made to be children, so that much less is expected of men in terms of maturity than is expected of women, which means that many men, under the umbrella of group honor, can get away with all manner of crimes and of mistreatment of others simply because they are not the ones who bring shame to the family. It is women. So in different ways, both sexes are their choices are limited as to what they can do and what they can dream of doing. This fear, then, that I talk about among moderate Muslims comes from the idea that I must go along with the consensus in my group. Because if I don't, then I am causing fitna, I am causing chaos, I am causing division. And that is among the worst cultural crimes that one can be accused of. But I mentioned that things are changing. In this country, the media and many policymakers continue to use the phrase moderate Muslims. Where are the moderates? Let me propose to you that moderates are not what we ought to be seeking. What we ought to be seeking and supporting are reformists. And now let me connect these two ideas of the moderate and the reformist. Rob very kindly mentioned that a few years ago, PBS commissioned a documentary based on my first book. The documentary is Faith Without Fear. PBS, in its wisdom, and I mean that quite sincerely, sent me and the star of the documentary, my mother, to Detroit to do a screening among Arab Americans. My mother had no idea what was in store for her. I did. And in part, I went because I was interested to see how my mother would handle the hostility. Well, the hostility came, and my mother was shocked. But she was shocked by something more that happened afterwards. During the reception, during which PBS made copies of my book available free of charge, and boy, were they snapped up. I have to believe that there was some huge bonfire in Detroit that night. Out of the corner of her eye, my mother noticed that over the course of a 2-hour reception, a group of young Muslims was forming, and it got bigger and bigger. And after all of the TV cameras and all of the microphones left, these young Muslims approached me and my mother, and they said, "Mrs. Manji, thank you so much for supporting your daughter. It's so rare to see a Muslim parent stand by his or her daughter as she speaks some very, very hard truths." And my mother, diplomatically, graciously, but somewhat frustrated, said to them, "Well, thank you, but why didn't you say that when the cameras were here and when the radio microphones were here so that other freedom-loving Muslims could see that they are not alone?" And a number of these young people looked at each other sheepishly. And one of them finally stepped forward just a little bit to say, "Mrs. Manji, you don't understand. We live here. You and Irshad get to leave 2 hours from now. But we stay in this community, and we can't afford to be accused of dishonoring our families." This is America. These are children of the First Amendment. And still, the cultural pressure of group honor intimidated and silenced them from speaking their truths as budding reformist Muslims. Ultimately, this is why I suggest to you that Professor Dajani, as I mentioned, one of my heroes, is not a moderate. He takes risks. He takes risks that ruffle feathers within his community. He is willing to put his life on the line for reconciliation. He is not defensive about the backlash that comes his way. Quite the opposite. He seems to be extremely, if I can use that word, calm and level-headed and philosophical about it. And what I would like to leave you with is this. The good news is that the Muhammad Dajanis of this world, though they are rare, will be more and more populous as you see the next generation of Muslims grow up. You know, not too long ago, I did an hour debate on Al Jazeera about whether there is need for reform within Islam. And afterwards, certainly, I received hate mail. Sure, I got vitriol. That's to be expected whenever you take a position on anything these days. But what I also got were love bombs. More than hate mail, love bombs from young Muslims on Twitter, on Facebook. And here's a sign of progress. Not a single death threat. Sounds kooky to suggest that that's progress. But on this issue, it is. And I think what has happened is that since 9/11, when many of the people who are now on Twitter were about this tall, are now this tall. And they have not internalized the defensiveness that their older brothers and sisters, that their parents and their aunts and uncles have. And so for them, open dialogue and honest debate are almost a given. And that is why I will go out on a limb and predict that in my lifetime, however short or long it may be, we will see a visible movement for gay and lesbian dignity among a new generation of Muslims. We will see imams, and not just lay Muslims, arguing for the full and unconditional equality of women. And we will see audible calls for respect of religious minorities within Islam, all of which are supportable within the Quran. The question is not about religious reform as such. The question is about cultural reform. And as Martin Luther King Jr. himself came to understand, cultural reform takes a very long time. If a country like the United States, born of the Enlightenment, of scientific rationality and individual liberty, needed more than 200 years to seriously tackle legislated segregation, surely we can give some of that time to Muslims to tackle our versions of segregation as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And that was very touching, Irshad. Thanks, Robert, for actually having opened this discussion. I think of myself more as a moderate rather than a reformist. And the reason is that the meaning of reform is to go back to the original. And I don't want to go back to the original. I don't want to go back to the state of affairs that was. I want to go to the state of affairs that is. I want to move on from the past to the future. And that's why I would like to call myself a moderate rather than a reformist. And I hope that Irshad will follow my road or my path rather than lead me to her path. And maybe this way we can be able to have this dialogue. It is, how is it? Actually, because I believe that moderation is balance, balance is justice, and justice is humanity. And this is my philosophy, this is my religion. So basically, right there. Okay. While I myself believe that Islam, Christianity, and Judaism are religions of moderation, reconciliation, and peace, and the religion is an essential part of the human pursuit for felicity and security, and thus it is part of the solution. Someone else may argue that religion promotes extremism, and thus it is part of the problem. Who is right, who is wrong? Can both be right? Where you stand depends on where you sit. Where I see hope, you may see despair. Where I read love, you may read hate. Where you find conflict, I discover peace. So it is like the nine blind people who were asked to describe an elephant, and each actually touched the elephant and there gave his own description. And so they came with different answers. But the point is that they are all wrong and they are all right. And so this way we can be both right and wrong depending on where we are. And this is the middle path. And so it is the gray zone that we have. A Hindu knocks on the door of a Muslim neighbor and asks if he could borrow a copy of the Quran. Of course, said the Muslim, let me get you a copy from my library. A week later, the Hindu returns. Thanks so much, he said. Fascinating book, but I wonder, could you give me a copy of the other Quran? But you are holding it, responded the Muslim. Which one do you mean, he asked. I read this one, replied the Hindu, but I need a copy of the Quran that is practiced by Muslims. So basically here, similarly, the Egyptian reformer Muhammad Abdu is quoted to have said upon his return from France, I saw there Islam without Muslims, and I see here Muslims without Islam. And I think that also would apply to other religions, that we can look to an extremist Jew and see in him that he is a Jew without Judaism, or an extremist Christian, and we can see him as a Christian without Judaism, and without Christianity. And in this way, I believe that the problem lies in whether we are Muslims, Christians, and Jews. What divides us is how we interpret the text, how we look at the text, how we read the text, what we do about the text. So when what the Holy Books say and what people understand, interpret and claim what it says, and often totally different things. So when reading the Holy Books, you may discover freedoms in the same line in which another may see strictures. What you see depends on what you are looking for. As the English poet William Blake once wrote, both read the Bible day and night, but thou read black where I read white. So basically, extremists read the Holy Books with a closed mind. They read it selectively, taking verses out of context or misinterpreting verses to meet their own needs, agendas, views, interests, and expectations. That's why extremists do exist in all religions. We don't see things the way they are. We see them the way we are. And in this way, it is actually, this is what reflects, this is what differentiates between an extremist and the moderate. The question is that all religions, whether Islam, Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, whatever religion you seek, all religions share the moral values of moderation, peace, love, compassion, mercy, forgiveness, kindness, tolerance, charity, justice, doing good, and forbidding evil. It is the whole idea of the golden rule is present in all religions. Do to others as you want them to do to you. So when we treat others kindly, fairly, and lovingly, we are truly living Torah. And so when we have problems, we seek refuge in the cross. And the Quran also states that there may spring from among you a community who would invite to goodness and enjoy right conduct and forbid evil. One of my favorite verses in the Quran. So also religions call for peace, and whether it is Christianity, Judaism, or Islam. And so here I believe that what my philosophy is to try to seek in the interfaith of all religion a medium value, and this value is moderation. So this is where we would all stand. It is Plato wrote about moderation, Aristotle wrote about the golden mean, Buddha talked about the middle way, Maimonides talked about the doctrine of the mean, even Ibn Taymiyyah wrote a book about the middle way. Hegel's synthesis of opposites, or Stephen Covey's book about the third alternative, and the Wasatiyya that talks about the straight path. They are all different expressions reminding us of moderation as a human core virtue to cultivate social harmony and peaceful coexistence. So we seek moderation in Judaism, we seek moderation in Christianity, and we find it also in Islam. To give an example, in Judaism, when the Talmud says the Torah may be likened to two paths, one of fire, the other of snow. Turn in one direction and you will die of heat. Turn to the other and you die of the cold. What should you do? Walk in the middle. So basically, it is walking in the middle because you are protected by the peripheries. If you walk on the peripheries, you stand to fall into corruption, into evil, while the middle road can help you, can help by making that balance. So basically, we find also moderation in Christianity, and we find moderation in Baha'ism, in Buddhism, in all religions. And I want to focus today on moderation in Islam, because there are those who are saying Islam is not moderate. And I'm not here to defend Islam, actually. Islam has God to defend it. But I'm here to build bridges of understanding so that we do not go into the abyss of hating each other or thinking we are right and the other is wrong. And that's why I'm trying to seek this middle value that we have. Islam, the core of moderation in Islam lies in two verses. One, which says, we have created you an ummatan wasata. We have created you a temperate nation, a balanced nation. And this is in Al-Baqarah Surah. And Al-Baqarah Surah is made of 286 verses. And this is verse 143, so it comes exactly in the middle. However, it is preceded, and wasat here means middle, linguistically, religiously, it means justice, centrism, middle ground, temperance. But the significance of this verse is that it is preceded by another verse. And then, so there is, the foundation is built on 3 columns or 3 bricks. It is the idea that it is preceded by verse 142 that says, he guides whom he wills to a straight path. So we are talking about a path, a straight path. And then, so it is a path to deliverance. And then the verse talks, and thus we created you a moderate nation, which actually builds on the golden rule. And then we walk onto that to justice. Actually, justice is the core, because when then the verse itself talks about being a witness, and to be a witness, you have to be truthful, and you have to have wisdom. You have to be honest and truthful to be able to be a witness. Maybe some are not, but this is the characteristics of a supposed witness. So here we have the road taking us to the middle path that would lead us to justice. And in justice, we find humanity. So this is the core of the golden mean within Islam in terms of moderation. So a Muslim moderate adopts an Islamic understanding of the Quran that is rational, progressive, and humanistic, which can only be gained through accepting the Quran as the only divine authority. He combines rationality, faith, and science in order to have a better comprehension of Islam. What are the characteristics of such a moderate? A moderate believes in doing what is right, because this is what the Quran says, and this is what all the other books say. So doing what is right is a really core essence of being a moderate. So the question is, what is right? And how do you know you are doing what is right? So basically the answer is found in the holy books. In verse Surah 3 and verse 4, which says, he has revealed to you the book with the truth, confirming the scriptures which preceded it. For he has already revealed the Torah and the Gospel for the guidance of men and the distinction between right and wrong. So actually the holy books are the guiding light for a moderate. So basically, thus a Muslim moderate believes in diversity and pluralism, because this is what the Quran says. We have made you into various nations and tribes so that you may know one another. He believes in a world which is multi-nations, multicultural, multi-religious, multi-languages, because the Quran says, had your Lord pleased, he would have united all mankind. Had your Lord pleased, he would have made you one nation. Had it been God's will, he could have made all of you one religion. So basically, he had created us in diversity, in tongues and colors. So basically, it is not, indeed, you do not guide whom you love. God will guide whomever he wills. So a Muslim moderate believes jihad is the spiritual struggle within the soul and heart to rid oneself of evil and sin, and not a struggle against non-Muslims or a war waged to convert non-believers, since God guides. I'm not supposed to be a believer, a preacher. And so in this way, because it is God who guides us rather than people. And so the best jihad is a word of truth before a tyrannical despot. This is the, so, and thus we tend to see that whoever is guided, he is guided for himself. And a moderate believes in religious freedom, because the Quran says there shall be no compulsion in religion. This is the truth from your Lord. Let him who will believe in it and who will deny it. In dialogue, come to that which is common between us. In that the fact that God will judge on Judgment Day will judge in that in which we differ. I'm not here to judge you, whether you are against me, whether you believe in what I believe or you do not believe in what I believe. This is God's will. It is God on Judgment Day that will decide in that in which we differ. So basically, in more than one verse, we hear that echoes, because it says that I will judge between you concerning that in which you differ. So if a Christian believes that Jesus is Son of God, and I as a Muslim believe Jesus is a prophet, it's not my place to tell the Christian he's wrong. It is God will decide on Judgment Day between us. So here, that's why I seek the values that are common, and I reject the values in which we differ, because those other values are not the reason why I should be in conflict with the other here on this earth. That's why a Muslim moderate does not believe in death penalty for converts, for agnostics, for non-believers, or for apostates, because it is the Quran that says if somebody does not believe in God, then his account is only with his Lord. So it is not my business to stone him, to behead him, to cut him, or to kill him. So also he believes in equality of sexes, because this is a hardcore that God has created man and woman from the same soul. So that's why man is not preferable to woman. So I do not believe women should stay at home or should be uneducated. I also do not believe as a moderate that women have the right and freedom to wear and learn what they desire. So a moderate does not believe feminism undermines the Islamic way of life. Aisha, the third wife of the Prophet, was a champion of women's rights. I do not believe that female genital mutilation is an Islamic tradition. I do not believe that it is part of Islam, and it's not mentioned in Islam. So I don't carry that weight that because some societies do that Islam is to blame. So also a moderate does not believe in stoning adulterous women, since there is no mention in the Quran of stoning anyway. Those who commit unlawful sexual intercourse of your woman, bring against them 4 witnesses from among you, And if they testify, confine the guilty woman to the houses until death takes them or Allah ordains for them another way. So basically, I could look also at another verse that calls for flogging, but I would like to look at this one, which actually does not. Also, moderate does not believe in suicide bombing against civilian targets, since the Quran condemns committing suicide or taking the lives of innocent persons. He does not believe in punishment for lesbians or homosexuals, since sex preference is not a sin and there is no sanctioned penalty in the Quran. A Muslim moderate is neither anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish, because the Quran is full of verses which actually talks, children of Israel, remember the blessings I bestowed on you, and that I have exalted you above the nations. Or children of Israel, remember that I have bestowed favors upon you and exalted you above the nations. A moderate believes in God's messengers without discrimination between any of them, because the Quran says that God did not discriminate between any of them. A moderate does not believe all the ahadith are authentic sayings of the Prophet and accepts only those that are in harmony and consistent with the Quran. He does not believe that the Quran abrogates early holy scriptures and that it is the book rather than one of the books. He believes in all holy books and teaches his children the wisdom contained in them. Actually, I tend to find that a lot of what we are being taught as children as Islamic wisdom has been taken from Jewish wisdom. So basically, that's why I think that our children should be taught Christian wisdom, Jewish wisdom, Muslim wisdom, even also for the non-heavenly religions. Yani there is a lot of wisdom that we can learn from. A moderate believes in the wisdom of Gandhi, which says religions are different roads emerging to the same point. What does it matter that we take different roads so long as we reach the same goal? Moderates fight evil by not remaining bystanders. They stand up to the extremists committing terror and violence in the name of God and strive to spread the values of moderation, reconciliation, tolerance, and coexistence. An open, creative mind leads to moderation. Moderation leads to reconciliation. Reconciliation leads to peace. And peace leads to democracy. And democracy leads to stability, security, and prosperity. This is the model of moderation. So it leads us. We have to have an open mind to be able to be moderate. And in this way, it leads us to security eventually. The enemy is fear. We think it is hate, but it is fear. Gandhi was right in that. It is, even today, the enemy today is fear and not hate. Yani, even a Christian now today, when he says that Muslims should not be part of this community or should not come here, it is fear that is actually telling him not hate. Extremists will not be eradicated by waging war of hate against Islam, but by having Islam and Muslim moderates as an ally to conquer fear by promoting moderation and reconciliation in midst of crisis and conflict. When moderates keep silent, extremists claim they are right. I will not be a bystander. I speak to allay fear and to break this wall of silence. I am moderate. Moderation is my philosophy, my religion. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you both very much, Irshad and Mohammed. I want to pose a couple of questions. First to Irshad. Now that you've heard how Mohammed has explained his view of moderation, I'll just mention a couple of words in his description or definition. Rational, progressive, humanistic, believer in diversity, pluralism, and equality. Is this how you view moderation? Or where does that stand between moderation and reformism? Are we talking about definitions here? What's the difference?
first of all, I don't see this as a semantic debate. I see this as a very practical discussion about reality. When Professor Dajani talks about moderation with the descriptors, Rob, that you've just given us, I buy it. I love it. I think it's wonderful. And in theory, therefore, I would be a moderate. But the reality is that moderates today do not behave in the way that you've just described. This is a vision, Professor Dajani, that you have enunciated for all of us. And it's a beautiful vision, and I believe we will get there. As a critical mass of Muslims, we will get there. But we are not there precisely because moderates do not act in pluralistic ways, in ways that humanize all kinds of people, in ways that give equal value and equal treatment to the lives of people other than their own group. And I think what this all comes down to is something that Martin Luther King Jr. pointed out when he was having to encounter tepid liberals in the South. He pointed out that in times of moral crisis, moderation is a cop-out. And what he meant was that when a system of belief that has the potential to be wise and tolerant and mature, when that system of belief has become so corrupt as to be the opposite of what it was meant to be, then being moderate in the way that you've described will not swing the pendulum back to wisdom and maturity and health. Rather, one has to be what he called radical, what I would call reformist. And so, he was saying this to those in the U.S. South who were in agreement with him that segregation, racial segregation, is wrong. But rather than all of these protests and all of these demonstrations and, calls for justice now, they wanted to take it slowly. The moderates wanted to be incremental in ending segregation. And MLK pointed out that the impact of injustice is not incremental. It is heavy, and it is urgent. And that's why we have to take a more, again, what he called radical approach to ending racial segregation. So I would argue that in the same vein, we as Muslims need to take a reformist approach to ending the injustices that we see happening in the name of our religion. And when we do, we will not get to a point of utopia. We will get to a point of moderation. So I'm describing the process of reform. You're describing, in my view, the destination. And the destination is indeed a humanistic, kind, loving, compassionate, merciful Islam. But we're not going to get there merely by not doing acts of terror. We're going to get there by standing up, by vocalizing a pluralistic vision of Islam, by, and this is key, taking the backlash that you have taken and that I have taken from our peers and our elders and sometimes our own families. And that is what stops most moderates from becoming, in their hearts, though they may be reformers, from becoming those reformers, because it's the fear of busting out of groupthink and out of dogma, the personal consequence, the personal cost that it takes. That is why we see behind closed doors many moderates saying the kinds of things that you're saying, but in public they are on script. And they will condemn Israel, and they will condemn America, and they will condemn India for Kashmir, and all sorts of others. But they are loath to point even one finger at ourselves as Muslims and own up to the fact that we as Muslims are responsible for what is happening in the name of our faith today. Again, though, I want to emphasize this is changing. And, you know, anybody who follows social media will attest that young people, young Muslims today, don't use the word moderate to describe themselves. They are increasingly using the R word, reform. So I think, Professor, we're all wanting, those of us who use the word reform to describe ourselves, we're wanting to get to your destination. But like Martin Luther King Jr., we do not believe that an absence of tension will get us there. We have to work and create the constructive tension to achieve the presence of justice.
Mohammed, powerful argument that to achieve this goal of moderation, you actually have to be an agitator. You actually have to be almost radical, or the term that you used from Martin Luther King's experience, although Irshad uses the term reformist now. So does one need to be sort of radical, reformist in order to achieve the objectives that you just outlined?
Actually, when I was reading Irshad's first book, I came across a story that she has mentioned in which she talks about her being elected as president of she was young in a high school, and she was elected president of the class. And then she brought these photos of Ayatollah Khomeini and put them there. And then the supervisor came and saw them and said, you should put them down. It's not appropriate to have them there. So she said, why? And I remember that when I was also elected president of the American University in Beirut, to be president of the student council, I also brought pictures of Che Guevara, Lenin, and Ho Chi Minh, and put it in my office. And then the president came to a meeting and he saw them, got very upset, and asked me to put them down. And I asked the same question, why? And but we move on from there. Now she mentions Martin Luther King, who is now my hero, along with Gandhi. I put down the pictures of Che Guevara and put up the picture of Martin Luther King and Gandhi. However, I also believe in the wisdom of this rabbi who two Jews came to him regarding a festering problem, conflict between them. And then when the first said his side of the story, he told them, you are right. And then when the second told his side of the story, he told them, you are also right. And then when they left, the wife looked at him and said, but Rabbi, how can they both be right? And to her he said, wisely, you are also right. So basically, and then actually one rabbi explained to me why she was upset, is that usually the rabbi gets money from the one who loses. So if both of them win, then there is no money there. So that's why she was somewhat upset. Anyway, the point is, I believe that what worked for South Africa might not work here, might not work. We should see things as they are And then we should learn from other experiences, but we should not copy them because they might not work. Yani, for instance, if now there is a lot of talk about BDS, about boycotting Israel as what happened with South Africa, which I believe is wrong, because I think that we should boycott those who are anti-giving Palestinian human rights, or those who are pro-occupation, or those who do not believe in collaboration or in coexistence. Okay, if we want to boycott such entities, but you do not boycott the whole entity, those who are supporting the cause and those who are against the cause. So basically, what worked for South Africa will not work in our case in Israel and Palestine. That's why I'm against BDS, and I believe in dialogue. And that's why I believe in our case, dialogue is the answer. Maybe boycott was the answer in other places, but in our case, it is dialogue. And this way, I believe that balance and moderation is the answer, in the sense that I believe that in trying to reach out to the other, we need to bring the good in the other. And this is what I'm against Trump in his speeches, where he is trying, like McCarthy before him, he's trying to bring the evil in the other, in the person, in the individual. He's not trying to bring the good out of him. And in his appeal, he might bring disaster. This is what happened in Rwanda. Just a radio broadcasting caused a whole massacre of hundreds of thousands of people within 4 months. This is what happened in Germany in the Holocaust. It was actually the continued incitement against Jews that has caused eventually to erupt into the Holocaust. The Holocaust did not happen in vacuum. Similar, the Rwandan massacres did not happen in vacuum. And that's where we have to be very careful about what we say and what we do. And that's why I believe in balance. I believe that if we adopt balance in whatever we do, whatever we say, then we will be able to reach out for the other and be able to resolve conflicts within a balanced view, within putting ourselves, like Lee Harper said in the novel To Kill a Mockingbird, putting ourselves in the shoes of the other, to wear the skin of the other and see things from the point of view of the other. And that's why I believe that the Palestinian-Israeli conflict will be resolved when we do that. And that's actually my hope. And that's why when people ask me, are you optimistic or pessimistic? Why aren't you see what is happening, and why are you still optimistic? I see you are looking at the present. I'm viewing the future. So that's why I remain optimistic. And that's what I hope will happen in dealing with these conflicts. That's why I remain moderate.
Rob, can I just add quickly? I want to echo and applaud Professor Dajani's condemnation of Donald Trump's latest statements. There will be more, I'm sure, about banning Muslims, incoming Muslims from the United States. I recognize that in calling for reform and suggesting that moderation in times of moral crisis will not solve the moral crisis, I realize that my statement could be misconstrued as meaning that immoderation is the better approach. And therefore, Trumpian immoderation is fine. I am not in any way suggesting this. In fact, back to Martin Luther King for just a moment. One of his teachers, informal teacher, somebody from whom he learned, was a woman by the name of Lillian Smith, a white woman from the U.S. South. First of all, the fact that she was a woman and the fact that she was white, and she could have taught him how to stand for his rights as a black man, puts a lie to the politics of identity. Let me just add that as a tangent, that we are, regardless of our skin color, our gender, our sexuality, our nationality, able to put ourselves in the shoes of others. We are able to empathize regardless of the identities that we carry around with us. But Lillian Smith taught MLK, among other things, that there's a difference between a destructive extremist and a constructive extremist. And all she meant by constructive extremist was somebody who, like Professor Dajani, was willing to speak truth to the powers of society about what needs to change, and then offer a constructive way for how to get to that change. So even calling somebody like that an extremist in today's context would sound scary and probably misleading. But what she was pointing out was that you have the choice of silence or you have the choice of becoming vocal. And if you become vocal, make no doubt, make no mistake, you will be deemed an extremist by many moderates, just as I have been likened to Osama bin Laden by many moderates. I've just been told that I'm the liberal version of Osama bin Laden, which makes me wonder when was the last time I ordered, planes into buildings. The point is, therefore, that when we talk about change, and positive change in particular, moderation as a destination is both beautiful and Islamic. But as a process and as a means, it is what Lillian Smith called walking down like a chicken down the middle of the road and being run over by vehicles coming from both sides. You have to stand for something, and you do. And this is why, again, Professor, with every shred of respect that I can muster, I wholeheartedly embrace your point that moderation is what we need to become. But I suggest to you that in order to get there, we need tension. We need people to get out of their comfort zones and begin thinking and begin engaging. And it doesn't have to be an ugly engagement, but it does have to be engagement. And most people will not engage unless they are somehow riled up to do so. And that is why interfaith dialogue, for example, leads nowhere. It's all about exchanging platitudes about love and common ground, but it doesn't challenge one another to actually examine what it is in our own belief systems that differ from the others and why, and whether we need to change ourselves in order to get to that point of social cohesion and coexistence. So tension is key, but it can be a creative tension, not a destructive one.
Let me just comment about the interfaith dialogue.
I thought that would trigger a
Actually,
comment.
I believe in interfaith dialogue because I've seen that there is a lot of ignorance about the other. We as Muslims do not know much about Christianity and Judaism. Christians, Jews do not know much about Islam. And I was at the Hebrew University a few years ago in which a Jewish professor, it was a seminar about anti-Semitism. And I was the only Arab or Palestinian or Muslim in that meeting, in which he was arguing, the professor before me was arguing that the Quran is anti-Semitic. And he was bringing verses saying that the Quran describes Muslims, describes Jews as pigs and apes. And so I was shocked, yani, because I did not think that the Quran does that. I have not by that time read the Quran, so I was wondering, does my religion do that? And so when it was my turn, I actually challenged him, saying that I do not believe the Quran does that. And so he got upset, left the room, and I thought he left. But then he came back. It seems he went to his office to get the Quran, couldn't find it, went and bought a copy from the store and came back and said, may I read to you the verses? And he read 2 verses in which said that the Quran, God punished the Sabbath breakers by making them into apes and monkeys and the pigs, swine or something. And so I said, but this is not about Jews. This is about God punishing Sabbath breakers. And the Talmud, the Sabbath breaker is punished by death. So here it is a punishment. It's not about the Jews as a religion. And there are many verses there that are also misunderstood. So basically he came and sat next to me, and I whispered to him, I hope that this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship, quoting Greek in Casablanca. So, but my point is that interfaith dialogue helps to clear the air, helps to actually explain, helps us to understand, and that's where I favor or support interfaith dialogue.
Okay, let me ask both of you about a different grenade that you put into the conversation earlier, Irshad, and that's about culture. You suggested, if I understood you correctly, that there's an awful lot of the problem that we're focusing on is deeply connected to culture, not religion. And you implied that this has a lot to do with Arab culture, not so much how one reads the holy books or what's in the Quran, but culture. So I want to ask you, and then ask you, Mohammed, if it's culture so much, why not focus on culture? Why focus on Islam? Why not take on Arab culture? And to you, Mohammed, is this right? Is this really not so much a problem of how we interpret the holy books, but this is Arab culture. It's a problem that's limited to the 300 million Arabs of this world, not the 1.3, 4, 5 billion Muslims of this world. It's a particularly Arab problem.
First of all, I want to contest the premise of even the question that you just asked, Professor Dajani, that it's a problem limited to 300 million, not to the 1.2 or 3 billion Muslims. The problem that we're facing is that Arab culture has colonized the faith of Islam. And so, unfortunately, this is a problem for all Muslims around the world. Even the world's largest Muslim majority country, Indonesia, once a haven of pluralism and tolerance, has in recent years become the recipient, the reservoir of billions of dollars, petrodollars, from the Arabian Peninsula, and particularly on the coastal areas, of which there are plenty in Indonesia, where many, for example, wealthy Arab tourists go. Well, in order to cater to them, what happens? Women in those parts of Indonesia are now forced to wear abayas. Okay, so the point again is that there is a colonization happening, but moderates do not speak about Arab cultural colonization of Islam. They speak only about American or Israeli or sometimes Indian colonization of what are considered to be Muslim lands. And that is, again, why moderation in theory is a beautiful thing, but in practice is actually a very narrow and limited approach to reclaiming the better angels of Islam. Now, why not then tackle culture rather than religion? Well, that's precisely what I do in my work. But then why the trouble with Islam instead of the trouble with Arab culture? Well, in part because Muslims ourselves have entwined Arab culture with the practice of Islam. So no wonder so often Muslim women outside of the Middle East are told that the only proper way of presenting yourself as a Muslim woman is to wear a pre-Islamic Arab garment known as the hijab and sometimes as the veil. So at the end of the day, we have to separate culture from religion, and then in doing so, take the best of both.
Okay. Mohammed?
I don't know about culture in the sense, is it Arab culture or is it, it's not. Yani, the Arabs have the problem of monopolizing Islam because of the fact that Islam, the Quran is in Arabic. And so they monopolize the language, and as a result, they feel they impose their terminologies, or they impose their understanding or their interpretation of the Quran. But the problem is that it is what is happening. I see it in terms of extremism and moderation. And for instance, you were talking about what has happened in these countries regarding imposing. And I think that this is related to the extremist of the reformers, such as the Wahhabism. And for instance, we have Ibn Taymiyyah, we have Sayyid Qutb, we have Hassan al-Banna, who were extremists and tried to impose this extremism. But it has nothing to do with being Arab or being within the Arab culture. At Al-Quds University, Hamas tells the students who are poor, particularly the women, unless you wear this veil, you will not get a scholarship. So the scholarship is linked to what you wear. And then I have seen many young women who shifted from wearing modern clothes to wearing the veil, not because they wanted that, but because there is scholarship in there. And so, or the family, or that there are girls who are doing it because the others are doing it, if not, peer pressure. So basically, I would say that I don't know if it is an Arab culture. I don't think so. It is a backward culture, yes. It is a traditional culture, yes. But Arab, I don't think so. I would not put that term there, because there are within the Arab culture, you would tend to find also there are those who are extremely modernist, who have studied in the West, or who are promoting values that are taken from the West or believing in the West.
Okay. Let's open the floor to your questions. It's a fascinating exchange. Please feel free to identify yourselves when I call on you. Try to keep your question fairly brief. We'll start over here. Yes, sir. If you could take the microphone, then we'll move around here.
Greetings. My name is Rasul Nafisi, and I have issue with Professor Dejani's presentation, because it is not uncommon for a lot of good Muslims to take the good verses out of Quran and say this is Islam and all that. And this is wonderful, but it's not practical, because in reality you can field a lot of other ideas from the extremists who emphasize the radical part of Quran, the anti-democratic parts of Quran, and the Ayatul Qital, or Surah An-Nisa against women, or Surah At-Tawbah against all other people. So basically, it is not a good idea to do the literal reading of Quran in order to say, Islam is moderate. And it doesn't work. It has not worked so far. I think a better idea maybe is to take a page from the Christian Reformation, although I agree with Professor Dejani that each culture is different and all that. But what happened in Christian Reformation, they distanced themselves from the literal reading of the text. And I said, let's look at the intention. And in Islam also, 700 years ago, the ideas of maqasid al-sharia came around, the purpose of which was to look at the intention of the lawgiver, not the word of lawgiver. So this is my...
Okay, so the question, can we ever, by focusing on the literal reading, reach the goal you want to attain, or do we have to transcend that into a higher level of trying to understand what the intention is?
The intention is humanity, and the intention is the good of humanity. So basically, if you are reading the Quran with that intention, then you will read a verse that will say, cut the hand of the thief. But you will miss that it says, but if he repents, then God is forgiving. So basically, if you want to take the first part and cut his hand, or if you want to take that part, figuratively speaking, and say, how do I cut it? Not by physically cutting, or else most people will be handicapped, and as a result, it will be a problem in society, but rather by teaching him a profession. And in this way, I cut his hand. So basically, it is whether you read that verse with a human side, with a human eye, with a human heart, or whether you read it with a heart of stone. And in this way, you can cut, behead, do whatever you want. And that's what I believe the difference between the moderate and the extremist. The extremists read it with a heart of flesh. The extremists read it with a heart of stone. The moderate reads it with a heart of flesh. So basically, that's what the Quran is all about. That's what Islam is all about. That's what all religion is all about.
And let me just quickly add that what the professor is talking about here is, of course, interpretation. And yet, if we look at the Quran literally, one of the things that I have been so surprised over the years in researching and studying the Quran is that it does differ from the Bible, both the Old and the New Testaments, in some significant ways. And one of those ways is, as I mentioned in the Guardian video, that the Quran, taken literally, contains 3 times as many verses calling on Muslims to think and analyze and reflect and rethink rather than blindly submit. And so just on that basis alone, if more Muslims, many more Muslims, took seriously the very book that they claim to be inspired by, we would see the kind of behavior that Professor Dejani is talking about. Instead, what we get from many moderate Muslims are these shibboleths that, if you kill a human being, it is like killing all of mankind. Sorry. That's not what the verse says. It says, if you kill a human being, it is like killing all of mankind, unless you are killing that human being as punishment for murder or other villainy in the land. In other words, if you consider American boots on the ground in a Muslim land as being villainy, then that clause within that passage of the Quran gives the extremist a loophole, gives the extremist an escape hatch. And so, once again, there is a lot of sanitizing going on in what the Quran says. Anybody who reads the Quran and seeks to be coherent about it will be forced to select, will be forced to choose. I cherry pick. Extremists cherry pick. I would argue with the greatest of respect that Professor Dejani cherry picks. The question is not, who's being true to the Quran. The Quran is an incredibly complicated document. The question is, who's being honest about their selectivity and to what end are they selecting? I'm selecting in order to bring out the better angels of Islam. And if that forces me to cherry pick, I plead guilty.
It's not about cherry picking. No, I don't agree. I think that it is more about how you read the text, how you understand the text. In the sense, even the text about, and for instance, to give you an example, the Al-Fatiha is like Lord's Prayer, and it has 7 verses. And then the last verses say, guide us to the right path, not the path of those whom you have blessed, not those with whom you are angry, or those who are lost. When I learned that, I was taught that those who are blessed are the pious. God is angry with those who do not believe in Him, and the lost are those in between, the hypocrites. Now it is being translated or being interpreted to say the blessed are the Muslims, God is angry with the Jews, and the lost are the Christians. Same thing with the verse, and we have created you a moderate nation or a centrist nation or middle ground nation. While here the word wasat is interpreted to mean tolerant and temperate. The radicals interpreted to say, based on Ibn Taymiyyah, to say, it means that there is no middle ground in Islam. There is, you are either right or wrong. And this verse means that Muslims are between Jews who killed prophets and Christians who made their prophet a god. So that's their interpretation. So actually they go beyond cherry picking to go into the text itself and try to misinterpret or try to put their own interpretation into the text in order to make it look as if it's a clash of civilization. Islam is better than others. Similar when it says in the Quran, religion to God is Islam, while actually the Quran meant Islam to include Christianity and Judaism because it meant believing in God and worshipping God, surrendering to God. The radicals would say, no, it means the faith, that religion to God, Islam, then Islam means that we have to erase all other religions, or all other religions have to convert into Islam to become Muslims. So they are playing with the text much more than just. I agree that there is some cherry picking, but also the more dangerous is the interpretation.
Yes, right in the middle.
Greg Rose, formerly at the Defense Department. In my work at the Defense Department, I had some tangential involvement in strategic information programs that the United States government, military, and State Department were undertaking on the whole issue of battle of ideas, so to speak, in the Arab world. And my question to you, and there was a lot of debate about it and a lot of controversy back and forth on various parts of it. Most of the audience that you have here is not Muslim. And when I hear about interpretation of the Quran not being Muslim, it's interesting. But I could see an argument for and against people like me and governments that are not Muslim, so to speak, not involving themselves in this discussion. It has to come from the Muslim world. A very good friend of mine was Archbishop in the Episcopalian Church in Cairo. And I asked him this at a dinner a week ago, and he said, no, this has to be Muslims talking about this. So my question for you is that. What role, if any, can and should the non-Muslim world play in the debate that you are both deeply involved in? And I mean not only in terms of non-Muslims in general, I mean government, I mean think tanks like the Washington Institute, other think tanks, and so on. What role should non-Muslims play in the debate that you both are frankly risking your lives in what you're doing?
Good question. Irshad, you want to start?
I mentioned in my formal remarks that supporting reformists, some might say dissidents, within the Muslim world is key to 2 things. 1, to their survival, And two, to bringing to this part of the world interpretations of Islam that, that typically media will not offer. It is through the support of those with dissenting points of view that we will ultimately, I think, understand there truly is diversity within the world of Islam. And it's not like Muslims understand this yet. Many Muslims, particularly of a certain generation, I'm talking about elders, refuse to believe that the new generation has a different point of view or different interpretations. And many, as I mentioned in my story about the kids in Detroit, are afraid to speak their interpretations for fear of being stigmatized and ostracized, and their families, more to the point, being pilloried for doing so. And so by bringing to this part of the world those voices that offer something fresh and different, and giving them places to do their scholarship, giving them platforms to express themselves, and creating at universities and other places, even hospitals, for example, as Muslim chaplains, reformist Muslim chaplains, creating positions for them to begin to engage, to raise conversations and then engage in conversations with both Muslims and non-Muslims, I believe is the kind of soft power that America, has the genius and the resources to offer to the world. I might add, by the way, that it wouldn't hurt to bring some reformist Muslim chaplains to prisons as well.
Okay, thank you. Mohammed, what role do non-Muslims play in?
Actually, I see three entities there in your question. First, there is the government. Second, there is civil society. And third, there is the think tanks in that way. For instance, I believe that it is the role of governments really to put a lid on extremism. Whenever there is an Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, whatever type of, then the government should actually not allow this because it poisons the environment. Then there are the think tanks whose role is to be a forum for such a dialogue in order to build bridges between civilizations and religions and communities. And then there is the civil society, which should actually, within the community, try to be open to various religions. That's why we are starting in Germany a house that called the Holderlin Nawasatiya House, in the sense that to open it for Christians, Muslims, Jews, whatever, to do activities there. There is, I read also in Berlin, there is a mosque, church, synagogue being built in one, where people can go there and pray. And that's, I believe, is very important in order to build bridges between the communities, to help them live together, understand. This is what America is all about, this multiculturalism, multipluralism. And in this way, I think what we need is not to look at Islam as the enemy, but rather as extremists within Islam. And so there has happened so many incidents before what happened in San Bernardino, but it was not committed by Muslims, by Christian walking into a church and killing. And then, oh, it's a Christian, then it is a murder. While the first time it happened when a Muslim does it, then it is Islam and it is the religion. And so rather than it's an extremist like any other extremist who have done similar things before. And so people are being, instead of looking at the problem about 50,000 or 100,000 as the enemy, who are the extremists within Islam, they want to portray Islam, which has 1.6 billion, as the enemy. And instead of taking Islam as an ally in order to fight this war of extremism, this war of terrorism, and so this war of enmity and hatred. They want to make Islam as part of that. And so that pleases people like ISIS very much, because they claim they represent Islam when they don't. They are in this way. But when you take Islam as your enemy, that's part of the big problem that we are facing. And this is where statements like Trump and other Republican, actually presidential hopeful, were not helpful in this, because they are bringing the evil in the people rather than the good.
Irshad, a final word?
Yes. I think Mohammad Dajani and I agree on far more than might have been suggested this afternoon. The reason I can remain a Muslim with integrity is quite simply this. We as Muslims are to worship one God, not God's self-appointed ambassadors. And it goes back to something that Professor Dajani so beautifully said, that it is God who guides us rather than people. And because we are to worship one God and not God's self-appointed ambassadors, none of us is to behave as if we have a monopoly on truth and knowledge, which means that it becomes a spiritual duty for Muslims to help build societies in which we can disagree with one another in peace and with civility, because anything less means that somebody is playing God. And so here is the delicious, perhaps paradoxical bottom line. Worshipping one God obliges us to defend human liberty. Maybe that makes me a moderate, maybe that makes me a reformer, but what I do know is that it makes me a friend and admirer of Mohammad Dajani.
And me, the same. Thank you very much.
It doesn't get better than that. So, look, Irshad, Mohammad, thank you both very much. This is a really fascinating conversation, and I'm quite grateful for the exchange of views. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Irshad, thank you, Mohammad.
Thank you.
All.
I'm the leading state sponsor of terrorism.